How does a man lose $50 million of his own personal fortune on a company that sells hardware no one wants to buy? Most people remember Steve Jobs for the iPhone, but in the late 1980s, he was a man in exile, cast out from Apple and desperate for a win. He spent $5 million to buy a small digital division from George Lucas and then proceeded to bleed cash for nearly a decade. This wasn't a calculated move by a genius. It was a high-stakes, ego-driven gamble that nearly bankrupted one of the most famous entrepreneurs in history. We like to think of Pixar as an overnight success, but for years it was a sinking ship that Jobs tried to sell multiple times. He was looking for an exit, any exit, but no one would buy it. The world didn't want 3D graphics, they wanted cheaper computers. Little did they know, this failure was about to rewrite the rules of cinema and create a multi-billion-dollar empire that would eventually save the very man who tried to give it away.
In the beginning, Pixar wasn't even an animation studio. It was a high-end hardware company selling the Pixar image computer. This beast of a machine cost $135,000. Its target market? Meteorologists and doctors. Hardly the stuff of movie magic. Inside the walls of this struggling company were two men, Ed Catmull, a scientist with a dream of making the first computer-animated film, and John Lasseter, an animator who had been fired from Disney for being too radical. These two were the soul of the company, but Jobs was the engine. He didn't care about movies yet. He wanted to sell the next big thing in computing. But sales were abysmal. They sold fewer than 300 units. Every month, Steve Jobs would write a personal check to cover the payroll, his jaw clenched, watching his next computer venture and Pixar both slide toward the abyss. The tension was thick. The dream of a digital feature film felt like a fantasy that was burning a hole in Steve's pocket.
By 1988, Pixar was a ghost town of unsold hardware. To show off what the computer could actually do, John Lasseter created a short film called Tin Toy. It was a 5-minute story about a tiny musical toy trying to escape a terrifying, drooling baby. At the time, rendering a human-like character was the holy grail of computer graphics. The baby looked, well, creepy by today's standards, but it was a revolution. When Tin Toy won the Academy Award for Best Animated Short Film, it was the first time a computer-generated film had ever received such an honor. The industry's jaw dropped. Even Steve Jobs, who was ready to pull the plug, saw a glimmer of hope. He realized he wasn't selling a box, he was selling a new way to tell stories. But the financial reality was still grim. Jobs laid off dozens of employees and shut down the hardware division entirely. It was a pivot or perish moment. Pixar was now a studio with no products, just a dream and a gold statue. With the hardware business dead, Pixar needed a lifeline. That lifeline came from the very place that had fired Lasseter years earlier, Disney. Disney was the king of hand-drawn animation, but they were intrigued by this new digital sorcery. They offered Pixar a 3-picture deal. But it was a deal with the devil in many ways. Disney would own the characters, the rights, and most of the profits, while Pixar did the grueling labor. Jobs hated the terms, but he had no choice. He had already poured $50 million into the company and was desperate for a return. The project was Toy Story. The concept was simple. What do toys do when we aren't in the room? But the execution was a nightmare. Disney executives, led by the infamous Jeffrey Katzenberg, kept pushing for the movie to be edgy and cynic. They wanted Woody to be a sarcastic jerk to appeal to adults. The result was a disaster, a version of the film so bad it became known as the Black Friday screening. Disney almost canceled the movie on the spot. After the disastrous Black Friday screening, Pixar begged for 2 weeks to fix the script. They went back to the drawing board, ignored the corporate notes, and found the heart of the story. Woody wasn't a jerk. He was a leader who was afraid of being replaced. Buzz Lightyear wasn't just a toy. He was a delusional space ranger who didn't know he was a toy. This emotional chemistry changed everything. Meanwhile, Steve Jobs was playing a secondary game. He knew Toy Story was either going to be a massive hit or the final nail in the coffin. He took a massive risk and decided to take the company public, an IPO, just 1 week after the movie's release. Talk about a Hail Mary pass. If the movie failed, the stock would be worthless and Pixar would die. If it succeeded, Steve would be a billionaire again. The pressure on the animators was immense. They weren't just making a movie, they were carrying the weight of a multi-million-dollar financial maneuver. November 22nd, 1995. Toy Story hit theaters and the world shifted on its axis. It wasn't just a movie, it was a phenomenon. It became the highest-grossing film of the year, earning over $370 million worldwide. Critics were floored. They didn't talk about the technology, they talked about the characters. The uncanny valley had been bridged by pure storytelling. And Steve Jobs? His gamble paid off. The Pixar IPO was the biggest of the year. Because he owned 80% of the company, Steve's net worth skyrocketed to over $1 billion in a single day. This was the moment Steve Jobs became the billionaire we know today. Pixar wasn't just a side project anymore, it was the most successful animation studio on the planet. They had done the impossible. They had challenged Disney's dominance in a field Disney had invented. The underdog had become the king. Over the next decade, Pixar released a string of hits that felt like magic. A Bug's Life, Monsters, Inc., Finding Nemo. They couldn't miss. But their relationship with Disney was crumbling. Jobs and Disney CEO Michael Eisner clashed like titans. By 2004, it looked like Pixar would leave Disney forever. But the winds changed when Bob Iger took over as Disney's head. He realized that Disney animation had lost its way, while Pixar was the new gold standard. In 2006, he made a move that shocked the world. Disney bought Pixar for $7.4 billion. The irony was delicious. Steve Jobs, the man who was once fired from his own company and obsessed with computers, was now the largest individual shareholder of Disney. Pixar didn't just join Disney, they replaced the creative engine of the entire company. Ed Catmull and John Lasseter were put in charge of Disney's own animation department. The student had become the master. So what is the lesson of Pixar? It's that technology is just a tool, but heart is the product. Steve Jobs initially thought he was in the hardware business, but he was actually in the human business. He almost sold the company for a fraction of its value multiple times because he couldn't see the path. But he stayed just long enough for the genius of others to manifest. Pixar changed animation from two-dimensional drawings to living, breathing worlds, but they did it by focusing on the one thing that never changes, the power of a good story. Today, Pixar stands as a monument to persistence. They weathered 19 years of losses before seeing a real profit. They prove that if you marry insane technical craftsmanship with uncompromising emotional truth, you don't just make a movie, you make history. Next time you see that hopping lamp at the start of a film, remember, it's the light that almost went out, but ended up blinding the world with its brilliance. I hope this deep dive gave you a new perspective on the strategies and the relentless mindset behind these global icons. If you enjoy deconstructing business empires and tech legends in this tech archive style, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on all notifications. That way, you will never miss a new blueprint of history. For those of you ready to explore more boardroom coups and technological breakthroughs, I have handpicked 2 videos for you right here on the screen. Click one to keep watching. I will see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.